This is the second Scratch tutorial. If you've missed a class Wednesday, you can listen to this tutorial and get caught back up. So that was Wednesday, September 17th. This is second Pong. We've already listed the other one on YouTube and through Edmodo. So my name is Mr. D. We're going to go through the second lesson. Since we won't be waiting for students to answer questions or complete software, this lesson will tend to go quicker and shorter than if we had a live audience. But for you, that means just pause your video and fill it out, and then start the video back up. I'll have little stopping points. I'll ask you to do that, and then I'll wait 2 or 3 seconds, and I'll just go on to the next video. So while the video might say it's only 30 minutes in length or so, or 20 or 40, you better plan on that. Doing what's in the video might take you well over an hour. So take you an hour, I should say. All right, here we go. So we're doing Scratch, and remember Scratch, you get MIT and scratch.mit.edu. You'll find it. The programming concepts we're most interested in you learning about are sequence, loops, if-then statements. And I would also add to this that we're going to want you to learn down the road about variables and arrays. In Scratch, those are known as lists. Okay? Now, a sequence in program describes the order in which a series of actions in your code will be carried out. I'm never going to ask you to memorize that. All I want you to do is realize the order matters. So if you put in move 10 steps, say hello for 2 seconds, play sound, think about what would be the last thing to happen in this bit of code. And if you played sound and moved that up to the front, what would be the first thing that happens? All right. Then we talk about loops. Loops are really important. In programming, the loop restarts from the top. Say you have a sequence of code, you put in a loop. Each time the loop is completed is an iteration, and it will keep doing this over and over again. You may tell it to repeat 10 times, so therefore it will do 10 times, or for infinite, forever. When we go to, in a lot of physical programming, you tend to use a lot of forever loops. Or traditionally, until we started doing embedded or physical computing loops, forever loops were often considered a no-no. All right, because your program was stuck in that loop. Okay, right here is a repeat for 10 times. So if the cat moves 10 steps every time, how many times steps will have gone? 10 times 10 is 100. How many times would it say hello? Well, it says hello once for 2 seconds, so it would do that 10 times, or play 10 meows. All right. And forever, it would just go do this indefinitely. And all you would do is hit the stop sign. If you've got that little green flag to start, there's a little stop, you'd stop to get out for a level. If-then statements tell your program to execute a certain section of code only if the expression evaluates to be true. If the expression evaluates to be false, the code jumps to the next statement. That's a fancy way of saying, if something is true, do this. Otherwise, go on. If this is true, do this. Otherwise, go on. So if the light goes red, stop. If the road has a stop sign, stop. All right. And here we go with a lot of times an if-then statements need to be in that forever loop because we're waiting for your hand to touch a key in this case. So if my right arrow is pressed, then change x by 10. If the left arrow is pressed, change x by -10. And what we want to talk about there is you have to put that in a loop. Otherwise, when you run the program, the computer is so fast, by the time you took your hand down to press that, it would be too late. All right? We've reviewed this by now. You should know this is where the cat's going to be running around or your object's running around. Here's where code is, costumes and sounds. So there they are. So your stage, your block palette, your script area where we dropped in scripts. All right, and so if we click on here, click on there, it's scripts. There's costumes, and then there's the next one after that would have been sounds right here. We really haven't gotten much into sounds. Okay, when we look at scripts, we have, if you want to see something, for example, you have look, so that shows you that. And then we can get into costumes. For example, in this gobo kind of fish thing, it has 3 different costumes. It just changes the appearance of the sprite. And if we want to change the backdrop, you click on the backdrop icon and you can change it there. Again, we did this on the first lesson, so it's a quick review. So when I click on this green flag, move 10 steps, I switch the background of the chalk to 2, and I switch the costume to 4. And remember, we copied the background, then we wrote on it with high class. This is in the first lesson. All right, then we started playing with the trampoline. We set the X mouse to X, and we had the mouse follow you the X. But now, we want you to use the keyboard to move that paddle. So if you got if key right arrow is pressed, then change X by 10, if left arrow. Remember to write this code on the paddle. So in this case, it's the trampoline. If you haven't done this code, please take a moment to do it now. All right, now let's start back over on our program. On our ball that's bouncing up and down, this is the code to make the ball bounce. And I'll show you all again this in a moment. So this points the ball in the down direction, moves 10 steps. If it hits on the edge, it bounces back. Go ahead, if you haven't done this already, go ahead and do it right now. It's good practice. Now, think about how you would make code to bounce off the paddle. Hint, use an if-then statement. Think about the code you would use to make the ball bounce off the paddle. If you can, write the code now. This is what that code would look like. If touching trampoline, point in direction 0. All right? Still moving 10 steps if on edge bounce. Remember, this code is on the bouncing ball, so it's saying, hey, if I touch trampoline, point in that 0 direction. Code to make the ball disappear if I miss the paddle. Now, in this instance, we had you use a trampoline, so that was the code we used here for this. In this one, you could be touching red. I would really suggest that you make a rectangle, draw it, and fill it in red. Okay? And one way you can do this is you can have it if touching color red, or if you make another sprite, you could have it if touching, for example, missed ball. So that would do it. Then it would hide it. You would move it to a new location, wait a half second, and show. And the reason we're adding this, we got to have it reappear, right? So it's got to hide. We're going to send it to 0, 1, 3, 1. Remember, X is left and right, so it's in the middle of the screen. 131 would have it up high enough. To make it feel a little more realistic, like it physically moved, we're going to put a delay of there, just a little half second, and then we're going to show. All right? Because if we hide it, we don't show it back up. And that's why we have to add this show command up here now, because if the game would stop with the ball invisible, there's nowhere to turn it back on. All right? So that's our basic game. Click on a flag, you point the ball down in direction, it goes to there. So it always starts from the same location. We always put in show because somewhere later in the game we can hide it, so we want to bring it back. If touching trampoline, point in direction 0. If touching color red, or I would say if touching missed ball, hide it, go back up to the top, 0, 131, wait a half second, then show it. And it'll start, because once it completes that, it'll go down to here and it'll start falling again. Let me go ahead and show you right here as I made this. Okay? Now, if you want to do it yourself, go ahead and try it and pause this. I'm going to pause, wait here a moment so you can pause it if you like. And then when you come back, or if you don't pause it, I'm about to show you what we just did again so you can see it. So, okay, now, let's go ahead and start what we do. In the very beginning, I'm going to center that. If I did this, if I just left it as this, please. Here we go. It's going to bounce, it's not going to do anything, but it is going to go up and down. And I got to be careful because if I don't set the direction, it could go to the sideways. So I want to make sure I point in a direction. So if your ball's going back and forth left and right, you want to point in the direction 180 down. And I always want to start from the same place. So there we go. Now I could randomize that down the road, and we'll look at randoming, and that might be a nice touch. You always have it this Y that high off the ground, but you might randomly change X, so it could drop from any spot. But again, programming, when you take a difficult problem, we break it into pieces, and we keep adding on to it. All right, so we know we have that working. Now, if I want to go ahead and have it touch the paddle and bounce, I'm going to add this little bit of code right here. Okay? If touch paddle, point in direction 0. So now when I run my game, it's going to do this. Okay? Now, I'm going to go ahead and get it so if it hits this red square down here, this red missed ball sprite I call it, it's going to disappear and go away. Again, I will let you pause here a second if you'd like to try it yourself. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and show you what I would do on that. Notice I'm already pulling these things from here. Okay. Make sure you don't move in 10 if an edge on ball ends up in either one of these if statements, because they can't move. It'll be in the if statement waiting to hit the paddle, but since it's not falling, it can never hit the paddle. Same thing for missed ball. So here we go again. If I hit the missed ball, I'm going to hide. Then I'm going to go to X10, Y112, wait a second, show, move 10 steps if on edge bounce. So here we go. So there you are. Don't worry about the variables there, and they're not even changing. We'll come to those variables in a little bit on my screen. So if you got touching paddle, touching missed ball, move 10 steps on edge. All right? Now, let's think about in this game, now I've got a paddle, and we can look at the code on the paddle just for those who might have a question on that. There it is, right arrow key, change X by 10 left, change right negative 10, right? All right, there's really nothing there, huh? So let's go back. Most action's happening with the ball. All right, it's always going to bounce straight up, which isn't really much fun on the paddle. So we're going to do things to get it to change. And what we're going to do is, bear with me, we're going to do something where we get it to turn. So do this after you point in a direction, because all you want to do is point in the right direction and then have it turn a few degrees. All right? So here we go. It's bouncing, and now we are getting an angle there, shot, right? And when it hits it, it disappears and goes back. See, it pops up, waits a second, then we can hit it back. But if you notice, it's always turning in that 10 degrees in one direction. So this is when we want to do something random. Also, please note, blue or motion, light blue is sensing. Let's go to math and operators, and let's pick a random number. In this case, because we're going down, we want a random number. It's not pointing zeros up. We're going up. We want a number between, say, minus 20 to plus 20. All right? And that's because that's in between 0. If it was going down at 180, you'd want something between, say, 160 to 200. So now when we go ahead and hit the ball, it's going to hit a little bit different each time. All right, so that's how we pick a random number. We go into, again, math over here, and you can pick a random number. You can change it once it's over there. Okay? Now, let's look at, so we're all set there. on our screen as far as picking a random number. Let's go back on our scene, which is actually in addition to what we have on the basic game. So we just added the right direction. Now, if we wanted to change the score of touching the paddle, all right, let's go back and look at our program. If I go into data, I can make a variable, and I've already made the variable score, so you would just click on make a variable and type in the name. So go ahead if you haven't. So for right now, you have a variable called score. And what we would do in the beginning is up here where we initialize these two things, we want to go ahead and hit score. Also too, we want to make this a show. So that way if for some reason we hide it, we always have it come back up. This part of your program, the top before you get in a loop, is the initialization. Most programs have that. We set all the variables back to 0. We bring in data if we saved a game or something there. It's where we want everything to start. All right? Now, that sets the score to 0, which is great. We run the game, the score is 0, but it's not really changing. Well, that's not really helpful. So what we have to do is think about where would we increase the score by 1. So if you look, you can change the number of scores, number of balls, or we can do it by the score. So we actually can change the score. I'm just going to slide it over here by 1. And I would definitely do that after these things have happened. If you put it right after touching the paddle, the score is liable to touch it twice. It happens so fast, you're liable to double score. So give it a minute to turn, give it a minute, start moving away, and you'll reduce it. So let's see if it works now. There we go. 3, 4, 5. And this is why I want to stop it. I want it to start over, set it to 0, so that way, you know, it's 0 in the beginning. So that's number score. Now, I want you to think about for me, if you would, I want you to think about how would you do if we had the number of balls. So say we had to start off with number of balls at 10, and the game is going to play every time you miss, you're going to reduce it by a point. How would you go about doing that? I'll give you a few seconds to figure that out. How would you get it to go ahead and reduce by 1? All right. So what we could do to reduce, what we can do is reduce by 1 is I want that to happen, the number of balls, whenever I miss the paddle. And if you think about the game, we would sit, if we had all kinds of time, you would sit and draw out the rules of this game. As we talked about in the very first webinar that we would really like to lay out and plan it, and then we'd write it out in our own words what's going to happen. So if you think about it, we're playing Pong. I have 1 score for every time my paddle hits the ball. That's going up. Well, what's going to end the game? Well, it ends the game when I start with, say, 10 balls to begin with, I go to 0 balls. So when do I want that to reduce the number of balls? Well, I want to do that whenever I touch this red square, meaning I missed. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to change number of balls again. And I'll do this after the wait. And I'm going to just simply say, and I could even put this at the bottom of this. It's going to happen so fast once the show goes. So it'll wait a second, show it, and change number of balls by -1. So now I'm going to start up. So let me get my... So look at the number of balls up there is 10 because I haven't missed it yet. Now if I miss, boom, boom. So we now have that rolling. So you now actually have a score in your one-player game. All right? So we have a score if the ball touches the paddle. We've got a score if you move it. Add music that plays when the green flag is clicked. You could certainly do that. One way to, so if we look at that, so here is our game, and if we wanted to add music, we'd go to sounds, and you could go in and play. They have a whole range of sounds, but you could play a sound every time it touches paddle. Now it might slow your game down a little bit, You can record a sound. All right. They have play a note. So you can play a sound where you record it. You can do play a note. They have other sounds that you can pull off of. All right. A note would be just one part of the song. Okay. Add another ball. All you would do is create a sprite. Now, and you would duplicate it. And when we talk about duplicating, that's the little keyboards up here. That deletes it, that duplicates it. So I right click it. I can also right click it and duplicate it there. Kind of cool as if you had during the game. And we'll talk about advanced techniques. During the game, a new ball comes in. All right, increase the speed of the ball each time it hits the paddle. Well, you've made that a variable. That's a great thing. We don't like magic numbers. So what we can do is something like this. You can actually go ahead and say, well, I could add a variable here and set that as to the speed of my Pong game. So what's setting the speed right now of the game? Well, it's at move 10 steps, isn't it? Move 10 steps. So we can make a variable and change the variable. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. But for right now, at this level, I want to make sure that you can do all this right here. All right. Now, so this covers the goals for the first Pong game. And let's go on for those people who have gone to the two-player Pong. That would be the high school folks. Many of the middle school folks have not gotten this far yet. All right, so let's go down there. So, and here is math operators. We just talked about that for selecting random number generator. You can do all kinds of things. You can do square root functions, pretty cool on that. So here we go. We add randomness term, which we just talked about. Here's data blocks. Create a variable. We increase the score by 1. Again, just talked about and did this. This sets the score to 0. This adds every time we hit it with the paddle. Now, this is the two-player game.